Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really pleased to see you. We're going to be talking about leadership tonight on MHTV. So before we get started, let's go to Dave so that he can tell you how to join in, because we really want to hear what you have to say about it. Dave?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Nicky. So as always, I hope you're watching along at home. You've got a couple of options for joining in. The first one is to post on the Facebook live feed. And the second one is to use the hashtag MHTV on Twitter. Either of those will be able to see your comments and your questions, and we'll feed in as much as we can to tonight's episode. But without further ado, back to you, Nicky.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kath, can you tell us a little bit about who you are for the few people, presumably, who don't know who you are? Could you let them know?
Yes, hello Nicky and hello Dave. I'm delighted to be here, especially as your finalist for the RCNI Awards, so I have to say that, and congratulations. There are other finalists, but you're my favourite at the moment. I'm Catherine Gamble. I am a mental health nurse. I'm head of practice education and research at South West London in St George's, and I recently stood down as the Royal College of Nursing mental health lead, and I have been around the academic, clinical and practice development arena for many years now. So I've been Catherine Gamble a long time.
You have, very long time, in a good way, So let's get to leadership then, because leadership in nursing is contentious. We seem to teach it all the time, but somehow when it comes to actually practically having leaders people know and can refer to, we sometimes struggle, and everyone just looks at Florence Nightingale, which has been some time ago. So what's your take on sort of nurse leadership and sort of what's going well and what we need to work on?
Well, I think the first thing that's come to mind is the Twitter chat you and I have just recently been involved in. I know that when I started my career, I had, actually, I know this is a bit controversial, but I had the RCN had always gave you a diary. And at the back of that diary was every steward's name, or the lead of the regional leads, and the people in the exec at the RCN. And I, at that point, had my godmother, who was part of that as she was a head of labour relations for the RCN. So she taught me that actually it was great to aspire to be somebody that was in the profession. And I know when I interview students and when I interview people to do nursing, or to do, come into practice development roles or anywhere, I often ask them, who are they aspiring to? And often people will talk about their families and being incredibly important. I think it's a real issue that we don't necessarily profile enough of the mental health nurses that we have and are there to aspire to. I mean, we've got so many significant pieces of research that our mental health nurses have been involved in over the years, and yet either we've vilified those people who have internally, we've been vilified them. So we, had, I don't believe in this particular model, or I don't like that. But there are really significant. IACT, for example, would not exist if mental health nurses hadn't got involved, and people really don't recognise that. And when I started at the Royal College of Nursing, it was almost a sort of afterthought in meetings that people asked. I would sort of say, mental health nurse does that, and it was all like, who are you? I think for me, who's been the backbone for me, and when I was training to be a mental health nurse, I mean, everybody talked about Hildegard Petplow, everybody talked about Annie Allshort, and we also had Patricia Benner, and you and I, as I said, have talked about it on Twitter, where I was surprised that very few people mention those seminal work that they did to help influence our practice and our interpersonal relationships as nurses. And I think that that's something that we have a responsibility as we go forward, and for the next generation, is not only role model people, but actually celebrate the diversity of our profession as well. And we don't have enough role models from BME communities within mental health nursing, and we do need to think but we really need to look at how we promote that expertise.
It's one of those things, isn't it, to look around and say, where is it? But if you've done nothing to look for it, to support it and to promote it, then where you left it. So, but you were saying particularly who the sorts of people who have really impacted you. And I can remember when I was a student, I just loved the tidal model. It really got through to me in a way that other things didn't. And for me, it really probably underpinned a lot of my practice in terms of kind of the ideas of social justice and kind of being very human with people. And so I think the people who do influence you greatly. But there's a very strange thing. We were just talking before we came online that we actually do have a really relevant current body of research that isn't really being referred to. So did you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of safe words?
Yes, I think, as you all know, I'm a co-editor with Jeff Brennan of Gamble and Brennan, working with serious mental illness. And, Jeff is a huge campaigner of and champion of safe wards, and has been involved in that with many others, including Professor Len Bowers. And quite rightly, Jeff got awarded last year with Mental Health Nurse of the Year. Because, and the reason I'm mentioning him is because safe wards is the most efficacious of any mental health nursing research. So I do not understand why mental health nurses aren't completely embracing it from board to board and saying we need this in every single place that we run and do any activity, because there isn't anything else like it. And I think we should be celebrating that. And one of the things that I'm appalled by is just how very limited we are as a profession in using what we actually know works. And, I know that Dave, a few years ago, did a memes and did that piece of work around raising the profile of mental health nurses. And at the time, I was delighted people were coming forward. But when we actually scanned through, and I know a colleague presented at the Mental Health Nurse Academics Conference, what struck me was that actually people were talking about feelings rather than actually saying what they did. And I think that's where we have a potential challenge, not only within our own professional conduct, but we are so waffly sometimes that actually we aren't showing our evidence base. And by doing that, we're getting weaker as a profession. But I think we've really got to revisit what evidence base we have and value the inputs that our nurse researchers are doing, and actually say, we are mental health nurses and we have contributed to this. As I said, the mental health nurse academics are a huge wealth of a fantastic breadth of experience. And of course, we have Eileen Skellern. And before I go off on a tangent, stop me if I do, what I'm also struck by is just how lacking in psychotherapeutic skills many of the younger generation are in terms of understanding, because I was brought up with Carl Rogers and the psychotherapy, and I'm thinking of this year's Skellern lecturer, who we're going to have to wait for next year to do, but Gary Winship is a very renowned psychotherapist, and Skellern and Allshort and Phil Barker and others were all really based on psychotherapy principles and behavioural principles. And that strikes me, we really do need to think, why isn't this still on the curriculum, and what is it? And I think because we've had such big numbers in our training groups, that actually that interpersonal skills are being learnt vicariously and excellently in some places, but others where it's all being just done with your practice assessor, and perhaps not really being seen as a priority, and understanding the dynamic of how somebody and the systems and the fundamental impact of trauma and the process of where people are, how they've got there. I mean, I often say in my teaching, all these really, I live near a school, and you see little people running about in the playground. I can guarantee you not one of them, if they were interviewed, would say, I'd like to be in a mental health situation, I'd like to be held in a forensic service, I'd like to be, not one of them will be hoping for that in their aspiration. So I think there is something very fundamental about understanding that trauma focused as well as a psychotherapeutic, and recognizing with our parative esteem, bringing in the agenda of understanding the physical health needs of our patients, but we have to have the right psychological skills to be able to have those conversations and make a difference.
Definitely. And I think with the new kind of curriculum that we've got, which is so task focused, it is one of the things that it is saying is all fields need to contribute. And I think mental health needs to step forward and say, we can do communication, we can do the psychotherapeutic stuff, we can talk to you about how to make information sticky for people, we can talk to you about how to support people, how when you're doing a smear, you need to think about trauma-informed care. This is not just about what you do to people, it's about what's happened to that person and how you can support them and hear them. And I think we've got such a lot to offer that we may be a little bit shy about telling people. And also, I think nurses think that everybody, or mental health nurses think that everybody knows it and that everybody does it, and they don't. No.
And I think that's the challenge, is that people dumb it down, or they say it's very complicated, so I'm not going to talk about it. And unwittingly, we're adding to the stigma. We're adding to the stigma of mental illness by actually not really sharing. And that's where at the moment I've, the co-production, and where I think mental health nurses can play a really key role, is that, for ever since I started as a practicing mental health nurse, I never really, I think it's because my mother came from a social work background, and also because I was never allowed to not consider others before I made a decision. So I'd always have to say, you know, what does other people think? And so I was, I think, a natural problem solver and a team player because I had no choice. But I think that's the point, is that the opportunity for everybody to feel that they are included, and you can hear it in the tone of voice as to whether people get it or not. I mean, just recently, and when I teach family work, I talk about whether or not you'll use I statements, so in using empowering language rather than saying you should do this, you should do that. And we know the participation ladder really does consider at that baseline all you're doing is informing and educating. But mental health nurses have got all the skills and beyond to go up the ladder, to look at how we consider co-designing services, co-designing our projects. In fact, we know that the MRC, Medical Research Council, actually used, and the National Institute of Health Research also used the examples of co-production because it was led by mental health nurses. Professor Jacqueline Sinner, City University, helped to put that together. That's not recognised, that's not sung about. And
why do you think that is?
Because I think we don't have enough PR. And I don't think there's enough public relations. I don't think there's enough marketing of us. And I think actually, I don't think we need to rely on anybody else. I know that we've talked about it at national level to think about how we market that. But I think we owe it to ourselves as a profession that to go into ward rounds, to go into clinical environments and to say, this is who I am, I'm very proud. I was taught by a very very astute mental health nurse from when I was in Manchester, as learning to be a mental health nurse, and her first piece of advice to me was never go into a ward round and be the one that walks out and gets the patients. Because the fruit of the conversation goes on whilst you're out of the room, and yet you're the most pivotal profession in that room. So she encouraged me. In those days we have notes, so put yourself right at the other end of the room, make it very difficult for you to get out, and also climb over your notes, so it makes it very sort of theatrical. And I literally used to take her seriously. I would just do this. Sorry, I have to go. And then at one point, on numerous occasions, said, I don't think I'm the only person in here with legs. Because I think there's something for me about how we put ourselves down. I see too many people going into ward rounds like small secretaries with blank pieces of paper. I will take advice. No, we're there to co-produce. We are there to demonstrate that at our heart are those people with lived experience, and we need to look out for them and support them every single step of the way. And if we're going in there being a little bit with blank pieces of paper, now just take a note of what you're not co-producing, you're informing, you're educating, but you're not, as far as I'm concerned, actually managing to function at your most professional level. And that's the challenge at the moment. We cannot underestimate. I am running with colleagues at South West London St George's a Burdett nursing project, which is supporting Black and ethnic minority nurses to look into the restrictive practices, because Mental Health Act review has had absolutely really very little. When I was asked to go in to be part of that, there was very little at all, any mention of mental health nurses. And yet here we are talking about the worst extremes that we've ever had, where more Black and ethnic minority patients are being held against their will in forensic services in all over parts of the service. And yet they were very rarely mental health nurses, largest, mixed, diverse group, least talked about. And I think we have a responsibility as both locally and nationally to say we need to be considered in every step of the way. And it's really interesting, even when you go into meetings where people say, well, we've got people on board. If you keep your lens really focused, they haven't got people on board. They're still using quite traditional approaches of it will inform you later. But no, that co-design is a unique skill that I think mental health nurses can really bring to the table.
We've got some questions coming through if you're ready. There's nothing bad going to happen. So, do you think other nursing fields face the same problems that mental health nurses face? People knowing about their forebears, they sound like they do because they can mention Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, but do you think that they have the same issues we do?
No, I don't think they have the same issue at all. No offence to my general nurse colleagues, they are better funded. They have a greater, we don't know now leveler in our CPD funding, but our general hospitals generally have more staff. They have more development opportunities in where they can be steered. You look at there's many nurse consultants, for example, in our general nurse colleagues. In comparison, our numbers have dropped where nurse consultants are concerned in this country. In England, I can't speak about Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but I am very aware that no, I don't think it's comparable. I think there is stigma about, and if you only have to look at the way that practice development in a lot of mental health nursing trusts are supported and how they're funded, it's fundamentally different to you look at the Moore Marsden, or you look at some of those the much bigger general hospitals, and their provision of support is very, very different and always has been.
Yeah. I've got a couple from first years I saw come through. Hold on, let me find those. One is, this is actually a good question, because people keep saying that you need to be able to lead yourself. What are they talking about? Good question.
I know. That is a really good question. Sorry, I have to stop. I was just about to let out an expletive. I forget where I am. It's at the end of the day. But that's a really, really good question. Yeah. I think what I would, how I think about that is how you know you're accountable. And I was once taught that actually when that how do you feel when you walk into a room? Is it, are the people in that room making you feel small, making you, and if not, how do I make myself known? I think that's, for me, how it is about our accountability. How
and about taking up space as well. Yeah, you see so many nurses try and squidge in the corner. It's like no.
But also culturally, let's not forget culturally. If you are, if you don't see yourself as pivotal into the decision-making process, then nor do your patients. And it has a triple effect, and that's what's emerging from the work we're doing at South West London St George's with our BME nurses. That's what they're telling us. We're not at the table, and therefore we're not actually able to articulate to truly understand what leadership is. But I think that's the good thing as well in some respects. Let's turn it on its head. I think there is more now about, are you, chief executives of self? Are you able to think, hang on, how am I responsible? How can I keep myself up to date? What can I do to ensure that I can provide the best possible in the worst possible circumstances, which is what we're dealing with and working within at the moment. And I think it's those bits. And if you, I get people to do a little diagram of themselves and in the middle of a page and do arrows out to demonstrate who's supporting them. who's supporting, they're supporting, arrows out to who they're supporting, arrows in to who's supporting them. And I use it as just a very quick sense check, really, to say, where are you? And if you've got all your arrows coming in, you've got, everybody, friends, family, you name it, all these arrows, you might think, am I a bit of a nightmare? How does is that a leader? I don't think so. I think a leader has arrows equal, so that you're supporting people, but you're also attracting people in as well. And there's an equal bit. So I think that's how I would do it. If you think about that, and I get people to use this as an aid memoir, because you can look at that, you can look at your arrows in and your arrows out 1 month, and it can look completely different to the one that you perhaps will draw a few months later, because it should fluctuate. But as I said, if you've got, you suddenly think, oh, yes, I seem to have got arrows. I've got everybody coming to help me. Yeah. Well, where's your leadership in there? And just to think about, well, how can I then make sure that it's not just me telling everybody to do, come to me. It's about me saying, I can support you. This is where your talent is. This is where you come from, come in here. And it's who you've got in your lifeboat. Yeah, I think. I don't know if that's really the answer. I think it's a great. I'm going to have to go away and think about it some more.
Well, we'll be on Twitter if anyone wants to follow.
Oh yeah, good idea. Let's make them answer it on Twitter, and then that will give a great ideas, and we'll generate from that.
Yeah. So Nafisa has come back. So hello, Nafisa. Lovely to see you this evening. How has the leadership role of mental health nurses changed over time? So I guess it's looking at with a bit of perspective about what's been going on. Because before, I think nurses really struggled to get leadership or be heard as leaders, and that is maybe changing. What do you think?
I think so. I was in the right place at the right time in my career when people spotted, Professor Julian Leff spotted attributes in both me and actually Jeff Brennan, and got us on a training program to teach us how to be family workers. And subsequent to that was the equivalent of what we aimed to be the Macmillan equivalent for people with schizophrenia, called the Thorn Initiative, which people like Tony Butterworth and Ben Thomas and Malcolm Ray and other real leading lights in the 1990s. And I went into my first meeting and was starstruck because all these people were around the table. And that was starstruck. I don't know. I mean, we are now, because of Zoom and because of the things like you're doing this, that we become a bit more approachable. I think I'm of the generation of mental health nurses that were so approachable that I think we've actually missed the trick a bit, because people don't necessarily see us as leaders, and in some ways quite rightly so. But at the same time, I think there are, my generation had people to look at, but maybe that's something to do with how we've sort of dumbed it down as next generation, because we had these sort of such horrific characters that actually we said, well, no, hang on, we've got to just get on with the work rather than being carried, all those things. But at the same time, I think we have got people emerging. I wish people would say more about and drop. When they introduce themselves, I've got a pet hate of people saying I'm a nurse by background. No, if you're still on the register, you're still a nurse. You're not by background, because you're still.
I'm just a nurse. That's the one that sends me over the edge. Just a nurse. So we've got a question here from Lucy. Yeah. Hello, Lucy. Catherine has talked about some long learning that she's taken from her training. Oh, has she thought about the legacy she will leave? Hard question, I know. Yes, Lucy, it is. And also, it makes it sound like she's on the way out. Right.
Maybe it's my own fault for saying I've been called my name a very long time. Thanks. I mean, the people who work with me know that I am when is it? When's the time?
I mean, it's interesting to think about it, because I mean, even first years could be thinking about this, isn't it? What do I want to leave by the end?
Yeah. What would be my legacy? I have to say, I'm really very proud. I'm a prolific journal writer, to the extent that my brother and sister only the other day were talking about my grandmother dying, and I went back to 1980, found the extract in my diary and photocopied it, and to remember that day, because it has the date of when she died, and I have got records of all sorts of unique things. So I've also got a nursing journal, and I suppose what I'm really proudest of, that when I qualified, because I'm dual qualified, when I qualified as a general nurse and I qualified as a mental health nurse, I still have the book that I wrote my pledge to myself, and that pledge I still stand true today. In fact, some of it actually mirrors the NHS constitution, and I didn't even realise the NHS constitution existed. But I think that would be something for me. And as we've done with our preceptorship programme in the past, we asked our newly qualified nurses to write themselves a pledge on our preceptorship programme, and we've also asked our students coming in to our organisation to write themselves a pledge, and then we've sent them their pledge back to them 3 years later, and to see whether or not that has been maintained. It caused great organisational issues at the time, and it's I'm not necessarily encouraging others to replicate it, because we lost so many students and letters, and anyway, it seemed like a really good idea at the time. But my legacy, I think there is something for me. I hope that people will take on board the co-production methodology and really see themselves as the pivotal people who are going to make the difference to the lived experience. And I know a lot of other professions will be saying that, but I think that's how we will stay centre stage. That from the word go, I became such an expert in family work. I was absolutely hopeless when an individual patient came and saw me. I was just like, where is everybody? We need everybody to help solve this. And so I'm much better at working in groups than I am in terms of that. But we've also got a whole generation of mental health nurses who are terrified of working in groups, because we haven't done enough to facilitate that psychotherapeutic understanding of how to facilitate groups. And our occupational therapy colleagues will be saying they will be doing that, but actually we should be providing it as a profession. And that's what I had a unique experience coming through and learning and being a ward manager and a deputy ward manager at Maudsley Hospital, was where I learned that to plan and to do our community groups were held every day. And whilst it might sound like I'm now an old dinosaur, and I think there is an opportunity for mental health nurses to reclaim the territory. I'd say to our ward managers, you have no idea how strong you are, really. I think we have, as a profession, been very, none of the things that would happen, the national service frameworks over in the 1990s and subsequently, all the changes have been driven by nurses. Nurses who have actually taken on far too much. My director of nursing colleagues, I take my hat off to them, because some of them have taken on the whole organisation. They've become the chief nurse of everything, bar the kitchen sink. And, that makes everybody think that nurses can function like that. But overall, if we're going to produce quality, then we also need to think about how to support our nurse leaders to be able to say, actually, sometimes that's too much, and we need to just backtrack and look at quality and invest in practice development. Professor Sally Hardy at East University will be really proud of me for saying that.
Absolutely. Let's see if we can get a couple more questions in before we head out. So I've got a question again from first year. who first remain anonymous. Always the sign of a good question coming. And they were saying, I had some really good ideas and I wanted to tell the nurse leaders in my organisation, but I just don't feel I can. What can I do to sort of make a difference? So that's the first question. So about how do you get in touch with, presenting your ideas and approaching leaders who are so busy. And I can understand, maybe unintentionally giving out signals, get away from me. So how do you present your ideas so that you can, because that's how you get identified, isn't it? As somebody who wants to.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I think there's first and foremost, if you can't do it locally, because, it is learning how to do that when you're a first year student. You could be perceived as Mr. or Mrs. over enthusiastic. I know that my first ward experience, I was told by my ward sister as I pinched my thighs. She said I was overconfident for a first year student nurse, and that she changed my off duty. In those days, ward managers could do it in just on a turn on a sixpence. She changed my off duty so I could go away and seriously consider whether I needed to be in this profession or not. She was absolutely, she really didn't like me. I was too feisty. But what it proved to me was that I'd stepped in too early. So my journal was a place where I recorded ideas and where I'd like to make a difference. I'm not saying, for goodness sake, don't bury that journal or bury those ideas. And then it's actually finding your allies. You can, as you go through your placements, you will find your allies who you'll then say, come on, why don't we think about it in this way? And then you've got a greater sense of bringing the evidence together. Because if you have these ideas, but you haven't really done the groundwork, then the better you can. It's like when you're working with a patient, the more evidence you have to take to the team and to say, look, this is the evidence that there's this person is recovering. It's the same way with our ideas, like Lambert and others with safe wards. They did their hard work. They really went into and looked at what was working and what wasn't. They did appreciative inquiries. They did that real basic ground rules. And I would suggest that's the best place to start. And then obviously, if you've got a whole group of you coming up with ideas, you use your universities, you use your nursing development team or the equivalent in the organisations. Talk to the student placement people who work internally in your trust, and that would be where I would start.
Absolutely, that's brilliant advice. And we've got Chanel saying hello from Costa Rica. Hello back.
Oh, how lovely of you! It's sunny.
I would imagine so.
It's throwing it down here.
Got a message from Ben. Hello, Ben. Talking about the role of mental health nurses playing in raising and ending ongoing institutionalization in mental health hospitals and other settings. So have you any thoughts on leadership around that?
Again, we were pivotal. We were pivotal. Mental health nurses, Ben's absolutely right. We were absolutely pivotal in helping people move out of institutional care. All the work that we did with the psychosocial interventions was all the research was done to help people move into the community. And we should be using that research and continue to use it. Nice guidance says what works, and yet, you rarely sort of see people saying, I know I need to deliver on this and I need to be able to do it in this particular way. I think we have a pivotal role to play and I also think we have a pivotal role to play in how we describe the people we work with we have a real professional responsibility to talk about their strength, to talk about who they are and not what they do.
Absolutely. So all nurses have, just to be clear for anyone who's watching who's a student, all nurses have a duty of care around safeguarding and obviously doing nothing that brings the profession into disrepute or certainly doesn't cause harm or danger to people. And it's an area where mental health nursing has fallen short in the past around managing power, and on occasion still does. So if you are in a situation where something is confusing or distressing to you, please seek support either from your university or someone you trust at work and let people know. But absolutely, this idea about have an evidence base.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's my point around know who's in your lifeboat. Your crew people will change over time. You know, I've had a number of people that I've thrown overboard every so often, and, you know, in terms of my imaginary lifeboat, but I would not have survived as a mental health nurse, as most of the people we work with wouldn't survive without a lifeboat. And, you know, our role is to help them build their lifeboat, but also maintain our own. Because, as I said, you know, there's likes of you, there's, you know, I've got a really wide network, and a network that involves other professions as well. And I wouldn't be able to have survived. It's too much of a roller coaster to try and do the mental health nursing by yourself. And that would be my recommendation, that from the offer, use your professional networks, use mental health TV, and our colleagues and our professional networks. Absolutely. It's so essential.
Yeah, we had students on last week, and they were talking about how important it was to have we student nurses and we mental health nurses to have that ability to connect outside just the people who you see every day, but actually being able to reach out to other people and understand that, you know, we're a family, we're a network, and we can support each other.
And that's why I think we should, I mean, I know there has been some poorer cases of social media, but what you, Dave, and Vanessa are doing is really vital in encouraging people to come forward and actually just talk about it as it is, and having an opportunity to share experiences and share narratives, because we're not doing that enough. We're not having, you know, those bits where you got to know your colleagues in a way that you got to know their culture, you got to know how they ticked, isn't happening anymore. And people are, one participant in our BME nurse project talked about it being bland, and that you're not going in being able to be your true self, especially if you come from a BME community. And therefore we have a responsibility to find the networks where we can talk about it and then empower ourselves to go back in and say, oh, actually, this is what mental health nursing is all about.
We talked a little bit about kind of like staying safe in leadership sort of situations. But so how do we move forward then? Because we're obviously at the end of our time pretty much. So if you're going to leave sort of the people who are watching with some ideas to think on, with key ideas about leadership, what would you say?
To go back to the lifeboat imagery, and the Janet Treasure, actually, in eating disorders, converted the research that's around family work into different animal characteristics. And so when she was talking about how your caring skills, that sometimes, you know, people are like ostriches, sometimes we can be like heffalumps, sometimes we can be, we can be a bull in a china shop. And she used images of dolphins, and all of us have those particular caring attributes. We don't just have to have somebody in our family with an eating disorder or psychosis. But what it makes me really remember is one, when we talked about the St. Bernard dog, having that barrel. I mean, I'm not suggesting it has alcohol in it, but it's. But one family member, when we were talking about this, said to me that St. Bernard dogs are really well trained and well equipped for the terrain, and that's what I was really struck by those sound words, because she was absolutely right. We need to consider how we support each other. So even if we haven't got great loads of continuing professional development coming, that we're supporting and teaching each other as we go along, and we're using the best evidence. And 9 times out of 10, that comes out of the people that we work with now. They are the experts, and if they're yelling at us, it's usually out of deep fear and deep concern. So I think that would be my message, is that we need to really think about how our legacy is talked about, people say, do you remember your first teacher? Well, I'd like people to say, do you remember your mental health nurse? And I think they do. I think they do. But what they don't necessarily get the opportunity to do is for people to really shine the light on what works.
Yeah, I think so. I guess we've covered some ground tonight, actually. Although I have to say, the abiding image for me is a St. Bernard, but okay. And so I guess on those wise words, we will be obviously tweeting out information and links to the people that we've talked about, so that anyone who's interested will be able to see that if you follow the MHTV hashtag. And I think that we'll leave it there for tonight and finish up. But thank you so much to our fantastic...
What a pleasure, Nicky. And as I say, all fingers crossed for your finalists bit.
Well, indeed. Yeah. Absolutely. We're also taking a break next week. So we're all going to be off doing other things. So please... you feel free to watch something from the archive, as we officially call it now. But thanks again, everybody, and good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.